Hey, it's Geoff Mosher here with another Inside the Birds Minute. Adam and I, on our last Inside the Birds podcast, talked a lot about the coaching vacancies and the coaching search, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from listeners, and I sense sort of a panic or a major concern about the fact that the Eagles don't have an offensive coordinator yet, and I'm seeing a lot of reaction feedback that suggests that the Eagles' offensive coordinator job is no longer an attractive job, or people fear what's going on with the Eagles and they're turning the Eagles down. And I think that everybody just needs to step back for a second, take a deep breath, and let's go through a few things. One, this is Doug Peterson's offense. It's great to have good, experienced offensive minds. Frank Reich was a very good offensive coordinator for the team as far as his reputation and his willingness to do what Doug Peterson needed him to do. Mike Groh was a guy that fans had a problem with, but if you had an issue with him as your offensive coordinator in October and November, certainly you have had to appreciate what he did in December when the team won 4 in a row and the offense looked very good with a whole different set of weaponries. But the main thing I want to bring it back to is it's Doug Peterson's play calling. It's Doug Peterson's plays. Obviously, he relies heavily on his staff, but remember what you thought of Frank Reich before he was Eagles' offensive coordinator. He was unemployed. He was out on the street. He had been fired by the Chargers. He was just a guy. Ho-hum. Frank Reich. Remember what you thought about Mike Groh when the Eagles brought him here. Okay, Mike Groh, he was here to be wide receivers coach. Did a pretty good job as wide receivers coach. Everybody thought he did an excellent job as opposed to Greg Lewis, when it may be true, but the reality is they also brought in Alshon Jeffrey, moved Aguilar to the slot, and all of a sudden and brought in Torrey Smith. You had a completely different set of weapons than you had the year before when it was Dorial Green-Beckham, Nelson Aguilar on the outside and completely lost, and Jordan Matthews in the slot. So a lot more productive of an offense. That helped Mike Groh's case. Then he became offensive coordinator, and then he became kind of, the guy who everybody wanted to pick apart and say was not doing his job when the offense wasn't looking good. But it's Doug Peterson's offense. So what's clear to me in some of the names that you've heard is that Doug is looking for someone who can bring in ideas to help him design the plays, not call them, but just design the playbook. And he's gone kind of far and wide. Young guys like James Urban from Baltimore, who's the quarterback's coach there, and obviously kind of a shocker, and Graham Harrell from USC, their offensive coordinator there, the air raid guy. And then you've heard some older names. Kevin O'Connell was a guy that they apparently had a lot of interest in. Adam Kaplan talked about that. He wound up taking the job in L.A. to be Sean McVay's offensive coordinator. He was a veteran. I'm trying to think if there was another veteran name that came out. But, the bottom line is that they've got the Senior Bowl coming up. There's plenty of time. I don't know if we can accurately say, and this is something I'm seeing a lot of, that the Eagles are getting turned down for jobs. Graham Harrell decided to stay at USC, but to our knowledge, did the Eagles offer him the job? I don't know. Same thing with James Urban. He had a chance to interview. He declined. Was he offered the job? That's the case to me. If you're offering somebody the job and they're saying no thank you, well, then you got something different. I can understand some concern about the fact that James Urban stayed in Baltimore and didn't even interview. But Graham Harrell, again, is a guy who is an air raid protege. Air raid offenses tend to be 4 receivers, 5 receivers, 1 running back, and the Eagles have 2 really good tight ends, and they've played a lot of 12 personnel. They're effective with their 12 personnel, and the tight end is basically like, a foreign player in the air raid offense. It's all wide receivers. So the idea that, the Eagles aren't going to get Graham Harrell because he's staying at USC and this is terrible, no. Look, I think it's great that Doug and Howie and Jeffrey Lurie or whoever's involved are kind of broadening the horizons and looking at not just veterans like O'Connell and maybe Jim Caldwell, who, by the way, a report came out today, Jim Caldwell is not going to be returning to Miami, so I think that re-enters his name as someone the Eagles will look at to bring in. But it's nice that they're looking at a little bit guys who are older, the veterans, the Frank Reich clones, so to speak, and also looking at the young guys, the college game, or a kid like James Urban who just helped redesign a new offense in Baltimore around Lamar Jackson. It's good to cast a wide net. It's good to do your diligence. At the end of the day, I think Doug Peterson is going to come up with someone who he thinks brings the best set of ideas. I tend to think it's going to be someone who's a veteran. Mike Kafka, I know they haven't reached out yet. There's a report that from Ian Rappaport of NFL Network that they are expected to reach out. We'll see. I'd be very surprised if the Chiefs let him go or if Mike Kafka wanted to make the change. He's basically the passing game coordinator for the Chiefs, and they can give him a nice title like passing game coordinator. Right now it's just quarterbacks coach, but he's got far more involvement in the design of the offense. If he came to the Eagles, he would be called offensive coordinator, but his jobs would basically be the same, to help coordinate the passing game and not call the plays. So the Chiefs can easily change his title, give him a bump in pay, and basically make it so that leaving the Eagles would only be a lateral move anyway, and we'll see what happens from there. Jim Caldwell's a name I think you have to look out for. But I just want to re-emphasize that just because a guy like Graham Harrell decides to return to USC and maybe take his name out of the hat, doesn't mean that the Eagles were definitely giving him the job anyway. And some of these guys you're going to hear, and Graham's a good example of it, is a guy that not too many people even heard or thought or knew much about prior to the reports coming out of the Eagles' interest. So if you didn't really know who this guy was before you heard him being linked to the Eagles, you shouldn't be really upset if that guy says he's going to stay where he's at and is not going to be joining the Eagles. At the end of the day, very few people really know and understand what the offensive coordinator does for the Eagles. And I can't sit here and tell you X, Y, Z. I just know that Doug calls the plays. He is the de facto offensive coordinator, the way you see the traditional offensive coordinator who calls plays for a different team. Like Kevin Stefanski was the offensive coordinator for the Vikings. Mike Zimmer was the head coach. Mike Zimmer focuses on defense. So therefore, Kevin Stefanski was like the offensive head coach. Well, Doug Peterson is the offensive head coach in Philadelphia. The offensive coordinator is more like his right-hand man. So he's looking for someone to bring fresh ideas. I've addressed the Deuce Staley thing. It doesn't look like he'll be offensive coordinator. It seems to me that this front office has a template of what it thinks the offensive coordinator for this team should be, and I feel that they think it's somebody who is advanced in the ways of the passing attack. They're a pass-first team. They have a lot of different passing concepts that they throw out there, Doug Peterson being the leader of that, and I think they want, and Doug wants, someone who is right by his side, who thinks like a quarterback, thinks like a passing maven, and obviously Deuce Staley with his running back background doesn't have that. Doesn't mean he can't be a good offensive coordinator. Doesn't mean he can't be a good head coach. It just means, and I've talked about this before, that Doug, Howie, the front office, they have their model of what they want the passing game coordinator to be, and somebody else is probably going to have to fit that model other than Deuce Staley, and we'll see. And I'm not here to pass judgment on whether that's right or wrong. I'm just telling you that's what it looks like from my viewpoint, from who I talk to, and we'll see what happens and who they bring in and what kind of impact that might have on Deuce Staley and the organization. All right, so again, don't panic too much. I don't think anything we've heard about in the last week is a sign that it's no longer a good job. And do remember that not a lot of people were gung-ho about Frank Reich when he took the job, and same thing about Mike Groh. So whoever they do wind up hiring, you might be excited for that minute. You might not be happy about it for that minute. But a month or two from now, when you're talking about the Eagles offense, you're talking about Doug Peterson and his fingerprints on the playbook. All right? This has been another Inside the Birds Minute with Geoff Mosher. Make sure you're listening to the Inside the Birds podcast with me and Adam Kaplan. And please, please, please subscribe to this channel on YouTube. Appreciate it. Have a great night, everybody.